Sign it.
A prenup now?
I'm protecting what I built.
From me?
From uncertainty.
Right, makes sense.
My wife slid a prenup across the table and said, "I'm not risking my future on you." I didn't argue. I didn't question it, I just smiled. Because by the time she said that, her future already depended on me. My name is Daniel Hayes. I'm 36, 6'1", lean build, the kind of man people underestimate at first glance. I keep my hair short, dark brown, always slightly messy, like I didn't care enough to fix it. But the truth is, I like people thinking I don't care. It makes things easier. I dress simple. No flashy watches, no loud statements, just quiet presence. People think I'm calm by nature. They don't know that calm is something I learned. Years ago, when I sold my first company, a logistics AI platform I built from scratch, it nearly destroyed me. Not the work, not the pressure, the people. Partners who smiled in meetings and betrayed me behind emails. That was the moment I changed. I stopped showing everything, I stopped being loud, and I started paying attention. That's why when Olivia slid the envelope across the marble kitchen counter that morning, I didn't react. Olivia Grant, my wife, stood across from me like she always did before a board meeting. Perfect posture. Sharp eyes, 34, tall, elegant, blonde hair pulled into a clean, low bun. Her style was always precise, tailored blazer, heels that clicked with intention, lipstick that never smudged. She wasn't just attractive. She was controlled. People respected her the moment she walked into a room. Some feared her. Most admired her. She built her logistics company, Grant Flow, into a rising powerhouse in Chicago. Fast growth, aggressive decisions, no hesitation. That was Olivia. She placed the envelope down without sitting. "My lawyer drafted this," she said, scrolling through her phone like she was answering emails, not altering our marriage. I looked at the envelope. Clean, professional, already prepared. "What is it?" I asked, even though I already knew. "A prenup," she said. "We should have done this from the beginning. We've been married for 2 years. 2 years. And now she wanted clarity." I opened the document slowly, flipping through the pages without rushing. My expression didn't change, but inside, something sharpened. Not anger, focus. Her tone was flat, almost bored. "I've worked too hard to leave things unprotected," she added. I nodded once. "Of course," I said quietly. That surprised her, just a little. She looked up for half a second, like she expected resistance, emotion, maybe even hurt, but I gave her nothing. She picked up her bag, adjusting the strap over her shoulder. "Take your time reading it," she said. "My lawyer can walk you through anything." Then she walked out. No kiss, no hesitation, just the sound of heels against the floor, and then the door closing. Silence. I sat there for a long moment, the document open in front of me. 11 pages. I skimmed faster now. Terms, protections, clauses, everything structured around one assumption, that I had less to protect. I almost smiled. At that exact moment, my phone buzzed. Marcus Reed, my best friend. Marcus is 37, broad-shouldered, dark-skinned, shaved head, always dressed like he just walked out of a gym or a negotiation, because for him, those are basically the same thing. He's loud, blunt, and fiercely loyal. Built his career in venture capital by trusting instincts over spreadsheets. The kind of man who doesn't like people easily, which is exactly why he never trusted Olivia. I answered. "You signed it yet?" he asked immediately. "No." A pause. "Don't," Marcus said. "Something about her doesn't sit right with me." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the last page of the prenup. Her signature was already there, neat, confident, like this was already decided. "She thinks I'm not a risk," I said calmly. Marcus let out a short laugh. "That's her first mistake." I didn't respond. Because for the first time in a long time, I realized something. This wasn't just a document, it was a signal. And if Olivia was finally making her move, then maybe it was time I started making mine. 3 years earlier, New York City didn't feel like a place where secrets could survive. Everything moved too fast, too loud, too exposed. And yet, that was exactly where mine stayed hidden the best. I remember the night I met Olivia like a photograph burned into my mind. A rooftop networking event in Manhattan glass walls, low jazz, expensive suits pretending not to compete. I wasn't supposed to be there. I had already sold my company 6 months earlier, quietly, for a number large enough to change the rest of my life. No headlines, no announcements, just signatures, a wire transfer, and silence. Back then, I had already decided something important. Attention attracts problems. So I became invisible. That night, I wore a simple navy suit. No tie, no watch, nothing that would invite questions. Just another consultant in a room full of people trying to be more than they were. That's when she walked in. Olivia Grant didn't enter rooms, she claimed them. Tall, composed, blonde hair falling just past her shoulders that night instead of tied up like she would later prefer. Her presence cut through conversations without effort. She was already successful back then, already building Grant Flow into something aggressive and fast-growing. People turned to look at her without realizing they were doing it. She noticed everything. That was her strength. That was also her flaw. She spotted me near the edge of the crowd, leaning against the bar, holding a glass of sparkling water. Not talking, not trying. That's what drew her in. "You don't look like you belong here," she said, stepping beside me. Her voice was calm, controlled, but curious. I turned slightly, meeting her gaze. "Neither do you," I replied. She smiled, not the polite kind, but the kind that meant she enjoyed resistance. That was the beginning. She asked what I did. I gave her the version I had perfected. "Consulting," I said. "Logistics systems. Nothing exciting." It was a lie built from truth. I had done consulting, just not anymore. Not after I built and sold an AI-driven logistics platform that optimized freight networks across multiple states. 9 years of work, sold to a private equity group in Boston for a deal worth tens of millions. But none of that showed. That was the point. She studied me longer than most people did. Most lost interest quickly when they didn't hear something impressive. Olivia didn't. She leaned closer instead. "You don't talk like a consultant," she said. I shrugged. "Maybe I'm not a very good one." She laughed softly. That night, we talked for nearly 2 hours about markets, supply chains, leadership decisions. I stayed careful, giving her just enough to stay interested, never enough to reveal the truth. Across the room, someone else had recognized me. Ryan Keller, mid-40s, slightly overweight, thinning hair, always sweating a little under pressure. A mid-level executive who had once tried to partner with my company before I sold it. He approached cautiously, eyes narrowing as if trying to confirm a memory. "Daniel?" he asked. I looked at him, calm. "You've got the wrong guy," I said smoothly. He hesitated, uncertain, then nodded awkwardly and walked away. Olivia watched the entire exchange. "Friend of yours?" she asked. "No," I said. "Just someone who thinks I'm more interesting than I am." That answer seemed to satisfy her. Or maybe it intrigued her more. Looking back now, I realized something. Olivia didn't fall for me because of who I was. She fell for who she thought I was. A quiet man, predictable, safe, easy to understand, easy to control. When I let her believe every word of that story, because at the time, I thought it didn't matter. The wedding was small, intentional. That's how Olivia described it. 25 guests, a private venue overlooking Lake Michigan. Clean lines, neutral tones, everything curated to look effortless. I remember standing there in a tailored gray suit, watching her walk toward me, thinking she looked perfect. Not just beautiful perfect, controlled. Like nothing in her life happened by accident. At the time, I thought that was strength. I didn't realize it was also distance. The first few months of marriage felt normal, predictable in a way that made life easy. We had dinners together, talked about work, shared routines. But slowly, something shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once, just small details that didn't quite sit right. Olivia began introducing me at events differently. "This is Daniel, my husband. He does consulting," she'd say. In her tone polite, efficient, like she was listing an item on a report. No warmth, no depth. I became a line in her narrative, not part of the story itself. People would nod, shake my hand, then turn back to her. That was fine. I was used to being underestimated. But what caught my attention wasn't how they treated me. It was how she did. One evening, about 6 months after the wedding, I attended a corporate dinner with her. That's where I met Ethan Cole. Ethan was 38, tall, athletic build, dark hair always perfectly styled. the kind of man who looked like he belonged on magazine covers about success. His smile was practiced, confident, and just slightly too calculated. He spoke smoothly, always choosing words that made him sound smarter than the room. Olivia introduced him as a key strategic partner. The way she said it carried more weight than when she introduced me. I noticed that. I always notice things like that. Ethan shook my hand firmly, holding eye contact a second too long. I've heard a lot about you, he said. His tone was friendly, but there was something underneath it, assessment. I smiled back. I hope it was boring, I replied. He laughed, but his eyes didn't. That was the first time I realized I wasn't just being overlooked. I was being evaluated. A week later, I visited my younger sister, Rachel Hayes. Rachel is 31, shorter than me, with sharp green eyes and shoulder-length auburn hair she never bothers to style. She works as a trauma nurse in Chicago long shifts, little sleep, and a personality shaped by seeing too much reality. She doesn't trust easily, doesn't pretend, and she's always been able to read people better than I can. We sat in her small apartment kitchen, coffee between us, the city noise leaking through thin windows. She watched me for a long moment before speaking. You don't look happy, she said. I shrugged. I'm fine. She didn't accept that. She never does. She talks about you like you're a detail, Rachel continued, not a person. I leaned back, arms crossed. You met her twice. Twice was enough, Rachel said flatly. Daniel, people like her don't marry for love. They marry for position. Her words stayed with me longer than I wanted to admit. Back at home, the pattern became clearer. Olivia worked late more often. Dinners turned into quick conversations between emails. Weekends became optional. And when she did include me, it was always in controlled environments, events, meetings, public spaces where perception mattered. I wasn't her partner in private. I was her image in public. One night, I overheard her on a call in the next room. She didn't know I was home yet. He's exactly what I needed, she said. A pause, then a quiet laugh. Stable, predictable, no complications. I stood there just outside the door listening. Not angry, not surprised, just am aware. That was the moment everything aligned. I wasn't part of her life. I was part of her strategy. And the worst part? She believed she understood me completely. She believed I was simple, easy, safe. I walked away before she could notice me, stepping quietly into the kitchen, because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the most dangerous place to be is exactly where someone thinks they have you figured out. It happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind that usually passed without meaning. Olivia was at the office again. She had started spending more weekends there, claiming expansion pressure, investor demands, the usual language of urgency she wore like armor. I stayed home, sitting at the kitchen counter with my laptop open, going through shared documents. Nothing unusual. Insurance files, property records, tax folders, routine. That's all it was supposed to be. Then I clicked into a folder labeled Archive. Clean name, neutral. The kind of label people use when they don't want attention. Inside it, there was a file. Exit strategy, marriage plan. I stared at the title for a few seconds before opening it. Not because I didn't understand what it meant, but because I already did. The document was 12 pages long. Structured. Precise. Written like a business proposal, not a personal plan. I read every word slowly, my eyes moving across the screen while my mind stayed perfectly still. Year 1, establish public stability. Year 2, merge financial narratives. Year 3, expand company valuation through controlled optics. Year 5, initiate separation. Clean, efficient, final. My name appeared repeatedly, not as a partner but as a variable, a supporting factor, something to be used, positioned, then removed. There was no emotion in the language, no hesitation, just calculation. And then I reached page 7. That's where everything shifted. A name was listed under strategic oversight. Ethan Cole. I leaned back in my chair reading that section again. Ethan wasn't just a business partner. He was involved in the plan. His role was outlined clearly, guiding financial timing, advising on valuation windows, ensuring that the company's growth aligned with the eventual exit. This wasn't Olivia acting alone. This was coordinated, deliberate, thought through long before I ever saw that prenup on the table. I closed the laptop for a moment, pressing my fingers lightly against the surface as if that would somehow slow everything down. It didn't. Nothing felt dramatic. No anger, no shock, just clarity, the kind that settles in quietly and doesn't leave. Later that evening, I sat across from Olivia at dinner. She talked about logistics delays in Phoenix, about a new contract opportunity, about how Ethan had been pushing for faster expansion. I listened, nodded, asked questions at the right moments. To her, it was a normal conversation. To me, it was confirmation. Every word she said now had context. Every detail fit into something larger. I watched her carefully, noticing the small things, the way she avoided certain specifics, the way Ethan's name came up naturally, too naturally. Like repetition had made it comfortable, like she didn't expect it to be questioned. The next morning, I made my first move. Not confrontation. Not yet. I needed information, real information. That's when I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Laura Mitchell. Laura is 35, sharp-featured, always dressed in neutral tones that make her disappear in a room until she speaks. Former financial analyst turned private investigator, she built her reputation quietly tracking financial inconsistencies, uncovering hidden partnerships, following money trails most people didn't even know existed. We met once during a due diligence process before I sold my company. She had impressed me then. Precise, discreet, unemotional, exactly what I needed now. We met in a quiet cafe downtown. She sat across from me, posture straight, eyes focused. "You don't call unless something matters," she said simply. I slid a printed page across the table, the section with Ethan's name, and she read it without expression. "You want to know how deep this goes," she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded once. "Everything," I replied. She folded the paper neatly. "Then we don't look at the plan," she said. "We follow the money." That was the moment I understood something important. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a system, and systems can be dismantled. I didn't confront her, not that night, not the next morning, not even a week later. Silence isn't weakness, it's positioning. After reading the file, I understood one thing clearly. Olivia and Ethan had built a plan that relied on me reacting emotionally. So I didn't give them that. I gave them consistency. I showed up to dinner, asked about her day, listened to her talk about expansion targets and investor pressure like nothing had changed. Because as long as she believed I was still the same man she had calculated, I had time. And time is the most valuable asset in any long game. The first real step came 3 days later. I reached out to Daniel Brooks. Daniel is 42, tall, slightly broad-shouldered, always dressed in dark suits that look simple until you notice the details. His hair is neatly combed back, his expression calm, almost unreadable. He's the kind of lawyer who doesn't waste words and doesn't lose cases. We met years ago during the acquisition of my company. While everyone else focused on the numbers, Daniel focused on the structure. He saw risks others missed, and more importantly, he knew how to build things that didn't exist on paper. When he walked into my office that morning, he didn't ask questions right away. He just sat down, looked at me, and waited. I handed him a copy of the file. He read it in silence, page by page, his expression never changing. When he finished, he placed it carefully on the desk. "You're not here to stop this," he said. "You're here to use it." I nodded once. Exactly. We didn't talk about confrontation. We talked about architecture, layers, ownership, separation. Daniel pulled out a legal pad and began sketching something that didn't look like a defense. It looked like a blueprint. "If they're building a system around you," he said, "then we build one around them." That's where the name came from. Blackridge Capital. Quiet, forgettable. The kind of entity that wouldn't attract attention unless someone already knew where to look. Within a week, the paperwork was filed through multiple channels, structured across jurisdictions that didn't overlap cleanly. On paper, it didn't connect to me. Not directly, not visibly, but it was mine, entirely. At the same time, Laura began her work. She moved fast, but never rushed. That's what made her effective. A week after our meeting, she sent me the first report. It wasn't long, just enough to confirm what I already suspected. Ethan wasn't just advising Olivia. He had financial ties to several secondary vendors connected to grant flow, hidden stakes, indirect influence, the kind of setup that allowed him to benefit from both sides of a negotiation. It wasn't illegal, not exactly. but it was strategic, and now it was visible to me. I started small, not aggressive, not obvious. Through Blackridge, I acquired a minority position in a mid-tier logistics supplier based in Arizona, one that had recently entered negotiations with Grant Flow. The company's CEO, Victor Hale, was a man in his early 50s, slightly overweight, with a tired face and cautious eyes. He had built his business over 2 decades, surviving downturns that would have destroyed most companies. He didn't trust easily, but he understood opportunity. When Blackridge offered capital, he didn't ask too many questions. He just accepted. That was enough. Back at home, nothing changed. Olivia still spoke about Ethan like he was indispensable, still moved through our house like it was a temporary space between meetings. And I let her. I didn't ask about the file, I didn't mention the plan, because the moment I did, everything would shift. And I wasn't ready for that yet. Instead, I kept building, quietly, carefully, every move layered, every decision calculated. Because if they thought they were playing a long game, they hadn't realized yet who they were playing against. The difference between reacting and controlling is patience. By the time Olivia noticed the market shifting around her, I had already been inside it for months. Quietly, systematically. Blackridge Capital wasn't just an entity anymore. It was a network. One that moved without drawing attention. One that positioned itself exactly where it needed to be. Around her. Not against her. Not yet. Around her. That distinction mattered. The first real move into Grant Flow came through a secondary route, not a direct acquisition that would have been visible. Instead, Daniel Brooks structured a layered investment through 3 intermediary firms, each one clean, unremarkable, and legally separate. Together, they secured a minority stake small enough to avoid scrutiny, but large enough to matter when combined. It didn't give me control. It gave me presence. And in business, presence is leverage. Olivia didn't notice. She didn't need to. People like her focus on major threats, not subtle shifts. That's what makes subtle shifts so effective. At the same time, I expanded outward. The Arizona supplier was just the beginning. Through Blackridge, I acquired positions in 2 additional logistics companies, one in Nevada, another in Illinois. Neither was dominant in the market, but both had something more valuable. Contracts tied directly to Grant Flow's operations. That's where the real control lived. Not in ownership, but in dependency. The Nevada company was run by Sarah Lynn, a woman in her early 40s, sharp-eyed, always composed, with a reputation for turning failing operations into profitable ones. She didn't trust easily, but she respected efficiency. When Blackridge stabilized her company's cash flow, she didn't ask questions, she adjusted. That's all I needed. Then came the piece I had been waiting for. The startup. 3 years ago, before Olivia, before the marriage, I had quietly invested in a small logistics tech company on the edge of collapse. It was led by Jason Miller, 29, thin, restless energy, always thinking faster than he spoke. Brilliant, but inexperienced. When I first met him, he was weeks away from shutting everything down. I didn't just invest, I rebuilt his structure, helped him survive. Now his company Freight Pulse was growing. Not publicly, not loudly, but steadily, and more importantly, strategically. Through Blackridge, I increased my position and guided Jason toward specific partnerships that connected indirectly to Grant Flow's network, to Olivia's network. What she saw as independent growth was alignment. Laura's second report confirmed something even more interesting. Ethan Cole had begun raising capital for a private side fund, quietly, select investors, controlled access. Yeah, he believed he was building something separate from Grant Flow, something he could leverage later. What he didn't know was that one of those investors was now Blackridge. Not directly, never directly. Through layered entry points, Daniel ensured that the capital flowing into Ethan's fund traced back to me without ever revealing it. Ethan shook hands with people who represented my money. He negotiated deals backed by my capital, and he never once realized it. At home, Olivia talked about expansion again, new routes, new contracts, pressure from investors to accelerate growth. She mentioned Ethan's fund one night, casually, like it was just another detail. "He's positioning himself well," she said. I nodded, taking a sip of wine. "Sounds like it," I replied. She had no idea how accurate that was, because the more she built, the more it rested on foundations she didn't own anymore. Control isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand attention. It waits. It connects. And it spreads quietly through systems until there's nothing left untouched. And by the time anyone realizes it's there, it's already too late to remove. The collapse didn't start with noise, it started with doubt. Small questions at first, numbers that didn't align, projections that felt too optimistic, partners asking for clarity that Olivia couldn't immediately provide. By then, I had already positioned everything. All I had to do was stop holding it together. The first crack appeared during a quarterly board meeting at Grant Flow's headquarters in downtown Chicago. I wasn't in the room, but I didn't need to be. Laura had already secured access to internal reporting through a contact, Michael Trent, a mid-level compliance officer in his early 40s. Pale, nervous posture, the kind of man who avoided conflict his entire career until one day he couldn't anymore. He had noticed inconsistencies tied to vendor contracts connected to companies I now partially controlled. He raised the issue internally. That was enough. Within days, the board requested a full financial review. Olivia handled it the way she handled everything: controlled, confident, dismissive of concern. But control only works when the system supports you, and hers no longer did. Payments slowed, vendor negotiations stalled, liquidity tightened in places she didn't expect. Not because of external pressure, but because I had quietly redirected the flow months earlier. The system she thought she owned had already shifted underneath her. The real moment, the one that changed everything, came when I made my move public. Daniel Brooks arranged the disclosure carefully, timed with the board's review. Not dramatic, not emotional, just documents, ownership structures, financial positions, 47 pages detailing exactly what I controlled. Stakes in her suppliers, indirect equity in Grant Flow, yet and layered investments that connected back to me through Blackridge. When those documents reached the board, the reaction was immediate. Not anger, not shock, silence. The kind of silence that happens when experienced people realize they've missed something critical. Olivia called me that night. Her voice was steady, but different, tighter. "We need to talk," she said. I agreed. When I walked into the house, she was already waiting. No blazer this time, no control in her posture, just stillness. "How long?" she asked. I didn't pretend not to understand. "Since I found the file," I said. She nodded once, absorbing it. There was no shouting, no scene, just calculation unraveling in real time. At the same time, Laura's final report landed. Ethan Cole wasn't as careful as he believed. His private fund, now partially backed by my capital, had been moving money through overlapping vendor agreements, not illegal on the surface, but when mapped together, it created a pattern. It's a pattern that suggested manipulation of contract pricing and internal influence. Laura didn't exaggerate. She didn't need to. The data spoke for itself. Daniel passed the findings to the right channels. Quietly, within a week, the board had seen it. Within 2, Ethan was under investigation. Investors reacted faster than anyone else. They always do. Capital doesn't wait for explanations. It moves, and when it moves, it takes stability with it. Funding lines were paused, commitments reconsidered, meetings canceled. Olivia tried to hold it together, reassuring partners, pushing back against pressure, but momentum had already shifted. The company she built on precision and control was now reacting instead of leading, and that was the one position she had never learned to operate from. By the end of the month, the board made its decision. Not publicly, not dramatically, just a quiet shift in support. They didn't remove her immediately. They didn't need to, they simply stopped backing her. And in a structure like Grant Flow, that was the same thing. I didn't celebrate. There was nothing to celebrate. This wasn't victory. It was conclusion. A system had been built, and now it had been taken apart, piece by piece. The meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp. Same boardroom, same long glass table, same skyline view stretching across Chicago like nothing had changed. But everything had. I arrived early, not out of habit, but intention. Control isn't about speed, it's about timing. I took the seat at the head of the table without hesitation. No announcement, no explanation, just presence. That was enough. The room slowly filled with familiar faces: board members, legal advisors, financial controllers. People who had once looked past me without a second thought. Now they avoided direct eye contact. Not out of disrespect, but recalculation. Olivia walked in last. She paused for half a second when she saw me sitting there. That half second mattered. It was the first visible break in her control I had ever witnessed. She was still composed, blonde hair pulled tight, tailored suit perfectly fitted, but something behind her eyes had changed. Not fear, not yet, recognition. She understood the room before anyone spoke. That was always her strength. But this time, understanding didn't give her power. It confirmed she had already lost it. She took her usual seat, not across from me, but to the side. Subtle, but final. The meeting began without ceremony. Daniel Brooks sat 2 seats away from me, flipping open a folder with the same calm precision he always carried. Across from him sat Evelyn Carter, a senior board member in her late 50s, silver hair cut sharply at the jawline, posture rigid, expression unreadable. Evelyn had spent decades restructuring failing corporations. She wasn't emotional, she was decisive. And today, she wasn't looking at Olivia. She was looking at me. That told me everything. Daniel spoke first. As of this morning, he said evenly, the controlling interest tied through Blackridge Capital and its associated entities have been formally recognized. No drama, no emphasis, just facts. Documents were passed down the table. I didn't need to read them. I already knew every line. Olivia didn't touch hers at first. She just stared at the pages, then slowly flipped one, then another, each movement slower than the last. Across the table, no one interrupted. No one defended her. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't uncertainty, it was alignment. Then Evelyn spoke. Given the current structure, she said, her voice firm, controlled, the board has voted to restructure executive leadership effective immediately. She didn't look at Olivia when she said it. She didn't need to. Mr. Hayes will assume the role of chairman. That was it. No applause, no reaction, just confirmation. The kind that doesn't need explanation. Olivia finally looked up at me. Really looked this time. Not as a variable, not as a detail, as the man she never understood. You planned all of this, she said quietly. Her voice didn't shake, but it wasn't controlled either. It was stripped. I leaned back slightly, meeting her gaze. You planned 5 years, I replied. A brief pause. I just used them better. No anger, no satisfaction in my tone. Just truth. That was enough to land harder than anything else I could have said. Around us, the meeting moved forward. Legal transitions, structural adjustments, decisions being finalized in real time. But none of it mattered anymore. Not for her. Because the real shift had already happened. Power doesn't disappear in an instant. It transfers, quietly, completely. And once it's gone, there's nothing left to argue with. She didn't speak again. Not during the rest of the meeting. Not when the final documents were signed. Not when people stood up and began to leave. She just sat there for a moment longer than everyone else. Then she stood, picked up her bag, and walked out of the room the same way she always had. Controlled. I measured. But this time, without ownership of anything she was leaving behind. I stayed seated, not because I needed to, but because I could. So tell me, if you were me, would you expose the truth right away? Or stay silent and take everything back? Walk away with dignity? Or stay and make them lose it all? And if you were Olivia, regret the plan? Or regret underestimating the wrong man? Drop your choice in the comments. Like and subscribe for more powerful stories, because some stories don't just entertain, they make you think.